How do you feel about playing certain creature types within your EDH decks? Whether you call them tribal or typal, whichever you prefer, I have always viewed creature type specific strategies and synergies as a little weaker because it limits you from playing the best spells within your colors. Because if given the choice, you should prioritize the creatures of your chosen type. Creature-based strategies, in my eyes, are kind of a thing of the past. When I was first starting in my EDH career, creature-based strategies were a pretty common sight. And I remember Cranko Goblin decks were all the rage. And I even remember the Eminence Commanders coming out and basically warping the format. From Edgar Markov being banned in 1v1s and giving you payoff from just playing creatures in your deck, and Anala, who was pretty balanced, in my opinion, one of the cooler ones. She made you a copy of a wizard, which you lost at the end of your turn, so you could abuse some ETBs. And there was Arabo, or Arabo, however you pronounce it, I guess, who could really help make some of your small little kitties pack a bigger punch as soon as they were able to go to combat. And then there's, well, I think you already know who I'm talking about. Probably one of the most popular commanders that I personally know of since Atraxa. Almost every person I know has either built or has thought about building the Ur-Dragon. But I'm not here today to talk about any of those cards. I'm here to talk about one of my favorite creature types throughout all of Magic the Gathering. And that's right, you've probably guessed it if you've watched any of my streams or you've followed me for any amount of time on Twitter. And you'll know that I cannot shut up about Merfolk. That is right. We're going to talk about Merfolk. Hello and welcome to the channel if you're new, and welcome back if you're a returning viewer. I am your host and your friendly blue mage Azoreign. You may call me Azo. We're just going to jump right into the video. Merfolk are often referred to as the blue elves. And if you know elves, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say that. I love these slippery little guys. Merfolk have a very powerful ability where they're very cheap mana-wise, and they usually have a very powerful, overlapping, compounding effects that usually help take some silly little fish into some really powerful board states. Over the years, Merfolk have been placed into the three-color pairing of white, blue, and green, and we see this in such creatures as Sig, River Guide, and Tuvasa the Sunlit, and we even get a little dip into black in the recent sets with Arami of the Dead Tide, Vohar, Voidalian Desecrator, and the classic Sig River Cutthroat. But Dimir Merfolk have not really gotten any support or focus, so we're not really going to talk about them. Merfolk have been around for a really long time throughout Magic's history, but for me, Merfolk really hit home when the set of Ixalan came out. Here I feel that Wizards of the Coast really started to show a lot more love to the creature type, and they really changed the design from what we all know to what we all know now. Merfolk have just been pretty basic, stereotypical, sea-dwelling fish creatures, and now, since Ixalan, they rebranded into a society that clads themselves in this really cool Jade-style armor, and I really just think it looks cool. So let's start this video off by talking about my potential commander candidates. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to talk about creatures that have a direct Merfolk benefit or payoff. So for example, something like Kinesos, Tishana, Tatiova, or even my beloved Thrasios. Those creatures don't really care if you're playing Merfolk. They all have their own decks and strategies, but none of them really care for the creature type that they happen to be. For the same reason, I'm going to avoid talking about mono blue legendary Merfolk in this category because we really need to have at least blue and green to really benefit from our creature type. So now that that's out of the way, we are going to talk about the first on our list, which I'm going to get right out of the way, is going to be Sig, because he is the only blue-white legendary. And if you want to see some Sig gameplay, I know that the professor over at Tolarian Community College has definitely played this deck on game nights, and the prof loves Merfolk, and Sig is one of his Merfolk decks. So I'll definitely link that video down below. And Sig is interesting because he can give a Merfolk protection from a color of your choice, which is actually pretty good. But for our creature type to get the best benefit, we really do need green. So maybe Sig can go into Bant Merfolk someday. I know when Tasuva the Sunlit was spoiled, I was a little disappointed that she leaned more towards enchantments. You had a Bant Merfolk that cares about enchantments, and it seemed like a missed opportunity. But anyway, but now believe it or not, once we make it past our guy Sig here, there are only two other Merfolk legendaries that actually care about other Merfolk. And at this point, you probably are guessing one of those creatures I'm going to talk about, and we're going to start with talking about Hackball. Hackball is the newest Merfolk legendary that was printed as the base commander for the Merfolk deck from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Hackball is an insanely strong Merfolk commander, as he allows each of our Merfolk at the beginning of our combat to explore. Now, this video isn't about exploring, but basically he allows you to either ramp lands, or you can look at the top card and you can move that card to your graveyard if you don't want it, or you can keep it on top, and then the creature that explored gets a +1/+1 counter. So he's either going to get you lands into your hand, or he's going to buff your creatures for absolutely free. That's just when you go to combat. So you get to avoid any attack triggers before getting some really great abilities from Hackball. And that is not all Hackball comes with. He gets another ability that reads, whenever Hackball attacks, you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, and if you don't, you draw a card. So I don't really know what else you want from a commander these days. He is a top deck manipulator. He gets you lands into your hand. He deals with +1/+1 counters. He can get you extra lands out, and he can draw you cards. So Hackball is quite literally the ultimate Merfolk package here. He just kind of does everything. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I don't like to run Hackball as my face commander. And when I say that, I'm meaning he's so powerful that your opponents are incentivized to kill him or just to keep him off your battlefield. So it seems a little hard. You are in green, so you can ramp, but when you're spending all of your turns trying to ramp to play your commander, it's a little counterintuitive. To try and get your commander to be out on the battlefield to give you those benefits is really hard when your opponents know how good he is. So that's kind of why I like to run Hackball in the 99. And so next, and the last one on our list, is we're going to talk about my personal Merfolk commander. And I know that I just spent the last however many minutes telling you how much I really like Hackball and think he's really strong, but that's just not really how I like to play my decks. I do think Hackball is insanely powerful, but I don't like to let my opponents know that my commander is really powerful as soon as I sit down. In games that I have played with Hackball in the command zone, and as soon as people start actually realizing what he does after you get through your first combat or you play your first game with him, people realize that he is very strong, and they're going to want to keep him off your battlefield, especially when you start building with a lot of little Merfolk, and then they get huge, and you get lands, and you get card draw, and you just get everything. So that's why my personal choice for a Merfolk commander is Kumena, Tyrant of Orazca. When Hackball first came out, I definitely switched to him immediately for the reasons that I had mentioned earlier, but then, oh baby, this new Secret Lair artwork for Kumena came out, and I could not resist buying this card. I'm sure that it's on screen next to me, and oh my gosh. It reminds me, honestly, the art reminds me of Darth Maul, who I just think is a really cool Star Wars character, and I dig the vibe. It is one of the most important things for me as a commander player to just be in love with the art and the vibe of my commander. And if you don't love your commander, then, that's kind of like a commander deck. You're just supposed to, in my opinion, is like you gotta love everything about it. You gotta love the art and the play style and the lore and whatnot. But moving on to the point of the video, Kumena is way less of a threat, and he tends to dodge some removal early, but he still comes with a lot of strong abilities like Hackball. He functions kind of like an Urza Lord High Artificer, where he can tap untapped Merfolk to get around Summoning Sickness. He can tap 1 Merfolk to make himself unblockable. He can tap 3 Merfolk to let us draw a card, and he can tap 5 Merfolk to put a counter on every Merfolk we control. So I think either of these slippery little lads are a great choice to lead in Merfolk heavy deck. So let me know in the comments who you would choose to lead your Wet Elf army. And moving past Hackball and Kumena, we have these other green-blue Merfolk legends that lend themselves to other strategies within our color pairing, but they're still great includes because of their creature type. So first we're going to talk about Vorel of the Hulklade. So we get a 3-mana 1/4, and Vorel is very classic. He's, my understanding, he's a pretty old card. He's been reprinted 1,000 times. You pay Simic, so you pay a green and a blue, and tap Vorel, and you double the amount of each kind of counter on target artifact, creature, or land. So he can be used to make creatures big. He can be used to, if there's other kind of counters. So notice how he says each kind of counter, and he doesn't just make us choose 1/1 counters or indestructible counters. He just says every counter on that creature you get double. Next is going to be Adrix and Nev, twin casters, a newer Merfolk pairing. So they have Ward 2, and you may know how I feel about Ward. I think Ward, to be honest, anything higher than like Ward 1 or Ward 2 is a design mistake. I think Ward is insanely powerful, and it's a way for Wizards of the Coast to say, hey, here's this really good, cool creature. We're going to give it Ward, so that way you play it and you want to buy it, and we're going to drive up the price for all our things with Ward. But that's for a different video. Adrix and Nev is a 4-mana 2/2 with Ward 2, and if one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many tokens are created instead. So he is a Parallel Lives, doubling season-ish card. He's a creature, he's a Merfolk, so he's going to benefit our strategies. Tatiova, Benthic Druid, a very, very strong card in her own right. So Tatiova is interesting because she just has one ability, but it's a very strong ability, Landfall. Whenever a land enters, we gain 1 life and draw a card. So basically, if Tatiova is out, she's just 3/3, she just sits there, and we play lands, we ramp lands, whatever. It says whenever a land, doesn't trigger once per turn, we play a land for a turn, draw a card, play an extra land, draw a card, play a ramp spell, draw a card. Tatiova is insane. Next up is Prime Speaker Zagana, an oldie but a goodie. So she is 6 mana, 2 green, green, blue, blue for a 1/1. But when she enters, she's going to check the greatest power among creatures you control. You put that many 1/1 counters on her, and then you draw cards equal to her power. So the interesting thing is that she is a 1/1, and then let's say we put 5 1/1 counters on her. You draw 6 cards. You draw cards equal to her power, not draw cards equal to the number of counters you put on her. So always remember to draw cards equal to her power. But I love Prime Speaker Zagana. She's been in a couple of my Blink decks in the past, and she's always just a good source of card draw. But recently, I am led to believe that for 1 extra mana, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think Tishana, Voice of Thunder, could be just as good, if not better. So Tishana is 7 mana instead of 6, but she's a star. When Tishana enters, she's going to draw us a card for each creature we control. So she doesn't check the greatest power. If we control 7 creatures, we draw 7 cards. She also gives us no maximum hand size, and then her power and toughness are equal to the amount of cards in our hand. So Tishana enters, draws cards, so she's going to draw at least 1 for herself, which doesn't seem like a lot if you only control her, but she does check herself, and then she'll check all your little tokens that you've been making, and you'll draw cards, and then it gets really big. Next up is another Zagana, so Zagana Utopian Speaker. This one's a little on the lower end, but I think that she provides some really good utility. So when Zagana enters, if we control another creature with a +1/+1 counter, draw a card. So she's a 4 mana 4/4, pretty good on power and toughness. She enters, we could draw a card. She also enters, she has an adapt ability, so for 6, it's pretty hefty, but you put 4 1/1 counters on Zagana if she has no other 1/1 counters. That's important, but you can make her an 8/8 so she can get bigger. She can tempo play with the game, so she comes in 4 mana 4/4, and then you can pay 6 and make her an 8/8, so she just kind of like goes up a level. And then she also says, now this is the part that I really like about Zagana, each creature you control with a 1/1 counter has trample. So it doesn't give it to just Merfolk, but it makes our Merfolk our little 1/1 that has 4 counters on it, is a 5/5, can be blocked by a 1/1 token. Now Zagana gives it trample, and that especially synergizes with Kumena and Hackball because they're both putting 1/1 counters on all of our Merfolk. And the last one, again, I mentioned this earlier, he is my beloved. He's broken in the most beautiful way. He is Thrasios, Triton Hero. So for 2 mana, we get a 1/3 that all he says is pay 4 colorless mana, which is just broken. Scry 1, then reveal the top card of our library. If it's a land, put it on the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, draw a card. He has partner. We're not going to worry about that right now, but we get to scry 1. So we get to say, oh, it's not a land. I don't want this card on the top of my library. I'm going to put it on the bottom. It's not what I need. And then you don't look, then you basically just reveal the top. Oh, it's a non-land. I'll just draw that. Or you go, oh, it's a land. Okay, I'll put it out. So you're either going to ramp or draw a card. And before that, you get to decide whether you like the card on top or not. So you're getting card selection. Then you're going to get to either put that in your hand or put the land on the battlefield. Thrasios is an old card. He's nothing new, but he is just one of my favorites. He's cheap. His ability is always relevant, and it's colorless mana, so your artifacts can help pay for it, or just the absurd amount of mana that you have, and especially he can be activated on other people's turns So like a good blue mage, please play your instant speed effects at instant speed. You don't need to pay 4 mana on your turn to activate Thrasios. Do it in response to a board wipe. Do it in response to removal. Do it in response to the person before you passing to allow you to go, then activate. Always try and hold up your mana to look like you are doing something. Now, after we talk about the Simic Merfolk legends, we have to talk about the mono blue Merfolk that we care about as well. And we're going to start off with talking about Emperor Mahale. I think it's IL. I think it's an IL, but it could be LL or it could be the second. I don't really know how Merfolk lineages and namings work, but I'm just going to call him Mahil Il for the sake of this video. So Emperor Mahil Il is 3 mana, 1 blue for a 3/3, and you may look at the top card of your library. You may cast Merfolk spells from the top, and then when we cast a Merfolk spell, we can pay 1 colorless, and then if we do, we make a 1/1 blue Merfolk. So again, this will be especially good in Kumena and Hackball, because Hackball is going to make that 1/1 Merfolk explore at the beginning of combat, and Kumena can use that Merfolk to either make himself unblockable, draw cards, or put counters on everything. Next is going to be Kopala, Warden of the Waves. I just like Kopala. He's pretty solid. He's a 2/2 for 3, and spells our opponents cast at target Merfolk we control cost 2 more to cast, and abilities our opponents activate the target Merfolk cost 2 more to cast. So Kopala just gives like mega ward to everything that we have. And next up is Svelun. Am I saying that right? Svelun of the Sea and Sky. So another 3 mana. These are all 3 mana. And Svelun is a 3/4. Svelun of the Sea and Sky has indestructible as long as we control at least 2 other Merfolk. So it's not something you see all the time, is indestructible Merfolk. But whenever Svelun attacks, draw a card. And other Merfolk have ward 1. So like I said, Kopala is like super ward. Svelun is just ward 1. Which can definitely make sure to save our commander or some value Merfolk that we have. And then we're going to talk about some Merfolk legends that are the outliers, and I'm going to talk about these individually, and you can read them on screen now. I'm not really going to spend too much time talking about them because they don't really do anything for our strategy, but they are legendary Merfolk. That's going to be things like Ambassador Laquatus, Alandra, Sky Dreamer, Empress Galena, if you're the true kind of evil, Emry, Lurker of the Loch, one of my favorites. We have Kinesos, Priest of Thassa, Kiora, Sovereign of the Deep, and my guy, the Old Faithful, Talrand, the Sky Summoner. Now, after all that legend stuff, we can finally move on and get to the meat of this deck. And I just want to start off this section by saying that I'm going to be talking about Merfolk-specific cards. I'm not going to tell you to run Cyclonic Rift or Mana Drain because you're a grown-up, you can think for yourself. And we're going to be talking about the fish today. So we're going to start off with some of the best fish friends that we can pack into our deck. So any creature type based strategy is not complete without its lords. So again, I'm not really going to talk about these in depth. I mean, they all pretty much do the same thing. So I'm going to throw them up on screen and you can read them for yourself. So we have things like Coral Helm Commander, which has the level up mechanic. So this one's really interesting because it gains flying, which is really important. And then it gains flying and then it becomes a Lord at level 4+. We have Lord of Atlantis that gives Island Walk. We have Master of the Pearl Trident, which also gives Island Walk. Then we have Merfolk Mistbinder, Merfolk Sovereign, which can make a Merfolk unblockable by tapping. We have Marrow Regery, which can, whenever we cast a Merfolk spell, we tap or untap permanents. So we can either ramp our stuff or we can tap down opponents' things. And then we have the last one, which is one of my favorites, and it's a newer card, is Voidalian Hexcatcher. So it has flash, so that's always cool. It's a Lord, so other Merfolk get 1/1. And then we can sacrifice a Merfolk and counter non-creature spells unless its controller pays 1. So if someone does a mega tap out for their Torment of Hailfire or their Exsanguinate, we can just sack 1 Merfolk and then we counter that spell. So that's good for us. We can also counter really harmful things like board wipes or spot removal. The next section I'm going to talk about is creating tokens. So that we're going to start off with Deep Root Waters. Whenever you cast a Merfolk spell, create a 1/1 blue Merfolk with Hexproof, which is really nice. It just has Hexproof, I guess. And one of my favorites that came with the Hackball deck, the Lost Caverns of Ixalan, is Deep Root Pilgrimage. And this is actually one of the cards that really, really made me want to keep Kumena, because Deep Root Pilgrimage says whenever 1 or more non-token Merfolk you control become tapped, create a 1/1 blue Merfolk with Hexproof. Again, so 1 mana cheaper than the Deep Root Waters, and so Kumena just says tap 5, And I'll tap 5 non-token Merfolk, put a counter on everything, and then I'm going to also make 5 token Merfolk, and then I can tap those and put a counter on everything again. So I think Deeproot Pilgrimage is insanely strong. And the next one is kind of a weird card. I didn't really know where to put this, but it's the Water Wine Prophet. So for 6 mana, we get a 4/4 champion a Merfolk. So when this comes into play, we sacrifice it unless we remove another Merfolk we control from the game. And when the Water Wine Prophets leave, that card that we removed returns to play. So it like exiles something we control, and then it can return it later. Whenever Water Wine Prophets deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a Merfolk, and if you do, take an extra turn after this one. I don't really know why I put it here in the order, but I think Water Wine Prophets it's really expensive for a Merfolk, like 6 mana. But I mean, taking extra turns, especially since I think that's why I put it in this section. So we're making tokens that we can sacrifice to the Water Wine Prophets and just basically start taking extra turns, especially if we can give the Water Wine Prophets unblockable. The next section is going to be counters, so 1/1 counters that are going to benefit both Kumena and Hackball to their endgame. So the Deeproot Elite is always nice, so it's a 2 mana 1/1. Whenever another Merfolk enters the battlefield, we get to put a 1/1 counter on target Merfolk. So the Deeproot Elite doesn't just get huge, we can either make our commander huge, we can make our Water Wine Prophets really huge to start attacking, and the Deeproot Elite can just start moving counters around to make everything threatening. Next is going to be Merfolk Skydiver. So when it enters, we put a 1/1 counter on target creature, but then I included it in this list A because it has flying, which is really hard to get in a Merfolk deck. And then it's got the 5 mana proliferate ability. So we can just, if we've got a bunch of extra mana and it's at instant speed, it's right before our turn, pay 5 mana, proliferate, put more counters, and that's really going to be what our end game is. And then we have probably the best Merfolk in the deck, arguably, is going to be the Herald of Secret Streams. So 4 mana, 2/3 creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them can't be blocked. This card is pretty much the win con with any time I've played Kumena, is he just says, okay, I'm going to come down, all your Merfolk are either huge or they're maybe even not that big, but he comes down and just says, your whole board can't be blocked, you're going to have a kill shot on one player. And lastly, these are not 1/1 counters, but this is one of like the scariest Merfolk that I play in my Kumena deck, is called Wake Thrasher. Wake Thrasher is a 3 mana 1/1 that says whenever a permanent you control becomes untapped, Wake Thrasher gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And I'm pretty sure, leave in the comments down below if you think I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I've looked this up and my play group has looked it up. This is how we've always played with it since I've had it. We play with Wake Thrasher as it gets a +1 for each permanent. Whenever a permanent you control becomes untapped, Wake Thrasher gets +1/+1. It doesn't say this only happens once. So let's say I untap 5 Merfolk and I untap 5 lands. Wake Thrasher then gets +10/+10. Wake Thrasher can just be one creature that takes out an opponent by itself. I love this guy. Wake Thrasher is awesome. Next, one of the most important things in any commander deck, we are going to talk about card draw. So card draw, we have things like Seafloor Oracle at 4 mana 2/3. Whenever a Merfolk deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Tributary Instructor, a 4 mana 4/4 with Mentor. So whenever this creature attacks, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. And I mean, a 4/4 is pretty big, especially with Merfolk being pretty low power and toughness usually. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. So that protects us from like board wipes, spot removal, blocking. You know, this card's just going to make sure to keep our hand full. One of my favorites is Fallow Sage. It's 4 mana. It's a little expensive for the Merfolk slot, but 4 mana, 2/2. Doesn't do much, but it says when it becomes tapped, draw a card. Now that's really good for Kumena because Kumena says tap 3 untapped Merfolk, draw a card. Fallow Sage by himself can just tap and draw us a card. So I like including Fallow Sage here. And the last one is the Aquatex Will. So for 1 mana, we get a tribal sorcery. And I mean, if you like saying typal instead of tribal, tribal is printed on the card, so I'm just reading the card. Aquatex Will, 1 mana tribal sorcery Merfolk. So this counts as a Merfolk spell. You can tutor this when things say tutor for a Merfolk. You can go ahead and tutor for this card. Put a flood counter on target land. That land is an island in addition to its other types. So things like our Lord of Atlantis and Master of the Pearl Trident that give island walk. This will be a nice way to get in combat damage for free. With those cards, you can enchant the mono green player and make one of their forests an island. And then if we control Merfolk, draw a card. I just wanted to talk about this here because it's pretty interesting. Next is another equally as important part of any commander deck is the removal section, and probably the card that you were thinking of right when you think of Merfolk, and removal is going to be Lull Mage Mentor. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may put a 1/1 blue Merfolk token onto the battlefield. Then tap 7 untapped Merfolk, counter target spell. Basically, with Lull Mage Mentor, the line is pretty much like go infinite, make infinite Merfolk, counter every spell, make 1/1s is usually the line with him. I love the artwork. Countering spells is one of the best ways to protect yourself in blue. Lull Mage Mentor, and it's 7 Merfolk. Like, if you ever have 7 untapped Merfolk, do you kind of deserve to counter spells? Let me know. That's just what I believe. And next is one of my all-time favorites. I have like 1 games off the back of this card, is the Surge Spanner. Whenever Surge Spanner becomes tapped, you may pay 2. If you do, return target permanent to its owner's hand. You can bounce problematic lands. You can bounce things that blue and green usually struggle to hit. I mean, you are in green, but you can start hitting artifacts, enchantments, problem creatures. You handle indestructible. It just gets around so many things. I really do like Surge Spanner. And next is Thada Adel Acquisitor. So Thada has Island Walk, and when she deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for an artifact and exile it. We can play that artifact until end of turn, so we can basically get a free Soul Ring if we want to, or what I like to do with Thada is you tutor through someone's deck, you take out their most powerful artifact, and even if you don't play it, let's say it's a Portal to Phyrexia, and you don't play it, you leave it exiled. So you basically just say, I'm going to take away your strongest artifact so that way you can't use it against me later. And lastly, we're going to talk about Tempest Caller, which, in my opinion, it's not really that great. It's an uncommon, but it acts as like a cryptic command. When Tempest Caller enters the battlefield, tap all creatures target opponent controls. You got that problematic token creator person. They're making a bunch of 1/1s to block everything. Tempest Caller comes down, taps their whole board. You get right in there for some damage. So I like Tempest Caller at 4 mana. Next up is going to be the ramp section. There's only a few cards here. Stony Brook Banneret is a 2 mana 1/1 with Island Walk that just says Merfolk and Wizards cost 1 less to cast. So pretty classic. I mean, it just deck wide 1 reduction. It's like the medallions. So I like Stony Brook Banneret. And the Deep Fathom Echo, which is a newer card. So 4 mana, 2 in Simic, green, blue. At the beginning of combat on your turn, Deep Fathom Echo explores. So that's why I put it in the ramp section. So we're going to do the whole explore thing. You look at the top. If it's a land, put it in your hand. If it's a non-land, you put a 1/1 counter on the Deep Fathom Echo. And then you can put that card in your graveyard or leave it on top. So Deep Fathom Echo, it's a 4/4 for 4 that explores on combat. So it will explore the turn that it comes in, but we're not done just yet. So then you may have it become a copy of another creature you control until end of turn. Doesn't have to be a Merfolk. If you stole something from someone else, if someone gave you something, you can make the Deep Fathom Echo a copy of a creature. So Deep Fathom Echo is a really, really good card that was printed in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Next, we're going to talk about how to untap your Merfolk. This is super important for Kumena specifically because his strategy is tapping, but Hackball is nice so you can go to combat and then you can untap your stuff. So it's like Vigilance, but without white, obviously. So that's going to be things like Quest for Renewal. Whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, put a quest counter on Quest for Renewal. As long as there are 4 more quest counters, you untap all creatures during each other player's untap step. So obviously, Seedborn Muse, Quest for Renewal are the same. Seedborn Muse is just the creature version. Quest for Renewal, I like Quest for Renewal. It's cheaper, it's 2 mana, and it's really hard to remove. So I like Quest for Renewal here. In that same slot is Marrow Commerce. So this is a tribal enchantment Merfolk. So this can be tutored with things that say search your library for a Merfolk. At the end of your turn, untap all Merfolk. So this doesn't do it as often as Quest for Renewal, but I've found that this card is easily tutorable. It's cheap. It counts as a Merfolk, so Hackball will make it explore, and Kumena can tap it to activate his abilities. Then we have Merc Fiend Liege, which is 2, and then Hybrid Simic. So it's 5 mana for a 4/4, and then it's a blue-green Lord. So green creatures get 1/1, blue creatures get 1/1. Then untap all green and blue creatures during each other player's untap step. And the last one is, I'm gonna probably say this wrong, but I'm just gonna say it how I've been pronouncing it. Tell me I'm wrong in the comments if you want. Is Zolotoyak, the Smiling Flood. So 6 mana, 6/6. When Zolotoyak enters the battlefield or attacks, put a flood counter on target land. That land's an island in addition to its other types, or as long as it has the counter on it. And then at the beginning of our end step, we untap each permanent we control with a counter on it. So it's just another way to make sure that we're getting that untapped synergy. Next up is only a single card, which is the interaction with our graveyard. The Deeproot Historian, a 4 mana 3/3 Merfolk and Druid cards in our graveyard have Retrace. You may cast cards with Retrace from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying their other costs. So it's really difficult for Simic to interact with its graveyard, and Deeproot Historian just allows us to do that for our creature type of Merfolk. And we are going to talk about tutoring. So Merfolk Harbinger and Forerunner of the Heralds, they're both 4 mana. There's not really much to explain here. They both say when this comes into play, you may search your library for a Merfolk card, reveal it, shuffle your library, put that card on top of it. The Forerunner of the Heralds has the added benefit of saying whenever a Merfolk enters, you can put a 1/1 counter on the Forerunner of the Heralds. So both these cards, they're tutors, like that's what you want. I mean, maybe you're playing Worldly Tutor, Finale of Devastation, all those great green tutors. Insert green tutor here. But these ones are Merfolk specific. And lastly, to round out this Merfolk importance section, we're going to talk about one of the most important things, and I've harped on this before, if you're paying attention, flying. It is more important than you think, and I have been straight up murked by decks where I just don't have any flyers and they just get free attacks on me because they have a really strong flyer. So we're going to talk about Mist Dancer, flying. Other Merfolk you control get +1/+0 and have flying. So this works as half of a Lord, so it gives a power boost and then flying. And then it also has Encore. So for 7 mana, 5 blue, exile this card from your graveyard. For each opponent, create a token that's a copy. Create a token copy that attacks that opponent if able. They gain haste, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. So Mist Dancer, if you play it, it's good. If it dies, you can encore it back out for that game-ending shot at to close out the game. And then you also have Thieving Skydiver. So it's got flying. It's a 2/1, but it's got Kicker X. When Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with mana X or less. If it's an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So this Merfolk just kind of wants to do a little bit of everything. It can take the strongest equipment. It can take swords, which are really, really nice. I use it most commonly to steal good things like a Soul Ring. It can steal really big, as I mentioned earlier, let's say someone has a portal to Phyrexia. You just play Thieving Skydiver. X has to be 9 in that case, but then you steal it. And so this comes down, it's a creature, it has flying, and it steals stuff. So it gives you the benefit of taking away your opponent's value. So after this section, that's just like talking about the best Merfolk cards that I personally enjoy, but we need to talk about the best non-Merfolk bangers here. And before we move on to the non-Merfolk stuff, there's just one more section that really doesn't count, but it also kind of counts, is I want to talk about the Planeswalkers, and the only Merfolk Planeswalker that I know of is Kiora. Now, there really isn't any real Merfolk-specific synergy, but seeing as she is the only Merfolk Planeswalker, I figured I would just throw these up on screen and let you see for yourselves. And, lastly, before we move on, but just why? Tell me why they had to design Kiora this way. I mean, I'm just going to leave it at that. She's up on screen. You look at it yourself. So anyway, we're going to move on to the non-Merfolk cards that are good for your Merfolk deck. First is going to be probably what you were all thinking, which is the Roaming Throne. I'm honestly, at this point, not even going to talk about the Roaming Throne. It's got Ward 2. You choose a creature type. It is the chosen type in addition to its other types. And then whenever a triggered ability it triggers an additional time. Roaming Throne is just like one of the best cards printed recently. It just does everything for every type. Any strategy that cares about certain creature types, Roaming Throne is just in there automatically. Next would be things like Coat of Arms. So each creature gets 1/1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least one creature type with it. Coat of Arms is old, it's classic, you know it. So it's like if I have 5 Merfolk, those 5 Merfolk are each giving the other Merfolk +1/+1, so then each of your Merfolk are getting +5/+5. It's just a way to basically, you hold Coat of Arms in your hand, you're going to go for that last shot to end the game, you play Coat of Arms, all your stuff gets huge, then you go to combat and you win. That's kind of how I like to play it, because it does benefit your opponent's things, so that's just a way to make it not benefit them and only benefit you. Next up is the Bident of Thassa. I just kind of threw this in here just because Thassa's Bident. Thassa's like a Merfolk god creature in the game. Kiora has the Bident of Thassa, that's what she uses. But whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card, and then we can pay 2 mana and tap the Bident of Thassa, and creatures you control attack this turn. If creatures your opponents... Jeez, I'm just not reading this card. Creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. So you kind of force that Spellslinger player who's just got a bunch of 1/1s, you force them to attack. So just kind of, card draw keeps you in the game, and then you can force someone to attack. I really like the card Sea Hunter, 4 mana, 2/2. Pay 3 mana and tap the Sea Hunter. Search your library for a Merfolk card, shuffle it, and put it into play. So now that is a lot different than the other Merfolk tutors of, put it on top, and then we got to draw it, then we got to play it. Sea Hunter just says, go and grab your 7 mana Tishana, put it on the battlefield for free. Sea Hunter, super, super great, very unique and interesting tutor. And then the last two iterations of the same card are the Ozolith and Ozolith Shattered Spire. The Ozolith, again, one of the best artifacts printed in a long time, so it's 1 mana. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto a target creature. So it just stores all your counters up. They don't go away when your things die or leave, and then it redistributes it onto one thing. And then Ozolith Shattered Spire, if 1 or more 1/1 counters would be put onto an artifact or creature you control, that many +1, so it's hardened scales on an artifact. But then it also says pay 2, 1 and a green, tap Ozolith, put a 1/1 counter on target artifact or creature, activate only as a sorcery. But then it also has cycling 2. So I just like Ozolith the Shattered Spire more than Hardened Scales, because it just does way more for only 1 more mana. So I would include it here in this section. Now, the last 2 cards that are super specific to my Kumena deck that I just really need to talk about because they always perform very well is the Throne of the God Pharaoh and Harvest Season. And both of these cards have to do with things that are tapped. So Throne of the God Pharaoh says, at your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. It's only 2 mana, it's really cheap, and it just is a way to deal damage to each of our opponents for us doing nothing, for us just drawing cards, or us putting counters on our creatures. And the same thing for Harvest Season. Search your library for X basic lands, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control, put them on the battlefield tapped. So I really like Harvest Season. Oftentimes when in my Kumena deck, I'm searching for 5, 6, 7 lands, and basically I just jump way ahead right after I play this card when I have enough Merfolk out. It's always a good thing to just get rid of a bunch of basics from your deck to make sure that you're going to start drawing not land cards, and then it ramps you so you can have some really explosive turns right after you play Harvest Season. The last thing that we're going to talk about, I really don't feel like I need to go too in depth on this, but we're going to talk about anthems, and I don't really need to mention them because they're a pretty key component in decks and strategies like this to give you any sort of finishing power. But that would be cards things like Overwhelming Stampede, Triumph of the Horde, Beastmaster's Ascension, Return of the Wild Speaker, Finale of Devastation, and the classic Craterhoof Behemoth. I just don't really feel like I need to talk about them. Again, like I said at the beginning of this video, you are smart, you are capable, I believe in you. You can go ahead and you will find those anthem effects if you like to play them. If you want to play Triumph of the Hordes and kill everyone with Infect, you can go ahead and do that. If you like just the classic Overrun or Overwhelming Stampede, again, you can do that. I don't really need to tell you to play those. That's just something that you're going to do if you like to play that way. So I think that is going to do it for this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you like what I'm trying to do here. And if you want to see more creature type deck breakdowns, make sure to leave that in the comments below. And do you currently play any Merfolk decks? And do you think that I missed anything? What do you use as your Merfolk commander? Do you like Heckball? Do you like Kumena? Do you like something else that I just didn't talk about? But yeah, I think that is going to wrap up today's video. Please just make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all the things, press all the buttons. And as always, I have been your friendly blue mage, Azoreign. You may call me Azo. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Go check me out on Twitch. I do stream here on YouTube and definitely trying that out. You can join my Discord if you want to talk to me, figure out how to be on stream, all that cool stuff. And I do try and read all your comments, and yeah, I appreciate it, and thank you for watching.